Well, yes, indeed. Well, let's go ahead and get started on what is this? This is volume six of PAS and Friends Conversations in Black. And I'm very happy to be joined by the chair of our department, the one and only Dr. M. Brandon McCormick. Thank you so much, good sir, for taking a little bit of time out of your extraordinarily busy schedule to talk with us about some important stuff.
Yeah, well, look, man, I'm glad to be here. Thanks to Kwame for organizing this. This has been a good series that you put together. So we really appreciate you creating this virtual series for us and a fantastic topic that you've got for us this time around on the sit-ins and the anniversary of the sit-ins. And so I'm excited to talk with y'all. And Dr. Kinchin, our historian here, who I'm sure you will introduce more formally here in a minute, but I'm glad to talk with folks and glad that PAS, the Pan African Studies Department at U of L, can put this on and invite this kind of important conversation in a moment where the larger political environment is trying to shut down these kinds of conversations. So I'm glad that we can open them up in this virtual space.
No, no, that's good. That's good. Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, you mentioned the third person in our little panel today, the one and only Dr. Shirletta Kinchin, our Black youth movement, Black power movement, and general historian of the African American experience. And it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Dr. K.
Hey, I echo Dr. McCormick, excited to have the conversation and big fan of SNCC just in general in terms of um an organization that helped to sort of be my entree into studying youth activism. You know what I mean? So I'm excited for where the conversation can go on this anniversary weekend. So thanks for the invitation. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's the timing of the launch of. We'll see. So we got the PAS and Friends Conversations in Black. That's an ongoing thing. And this chair is making a lot of noise, ain't it? It started in the fall. We're up to volume six, and within that, yeah, we want to start this other piece here. So over the next couple of years, maybe do a number of focuses on various aspects of the SNCC legacy, and we start today. And yes, why? Because yeah, it was, what is that, 65 years ago? Yeah, 65 years ago they started. This organization formally started at Shaw University, Raleigh, North Carolina, and we'll get to that. So let me go to let me pull up our PowerPoint that shall guide us through our conversation here today. So yeah. Um, so everybody see the screen pretty good.
Yep.
All right, cool. So anyway, that's our thing today. Let me see. I'm just going to quickly, for the benefit of anybody who, is just unfamiliar with us and what we're doing, just kind of run through what we've been doing, who we are. First of all, who are we? The Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville, started in 1973. We've been around, and we have we have a BA, of course. We have a PhD program that we just accepted a number of exciting students to for our incoming class, and master's program as well. Got about four folks who want to join us in the fall from that. And so anyway, that's kind of exciting in terms of just where we are, even though we are in Kentucky, which is to say we are in the USA, and all that means in terms of hostility and resistance to, well, our existence, actually. So let's move on. So this thing here, what we're doing here today, PAS and Friends Conversations Black Volume Volume 6, the SNCC Chronicles. So the series, I'm just going to just quickly, like I say, for the benefit of folks who aren't familiar, we started this thing back in the fall, and in fact, Brandon, you were here with us. What is the Black Studies canon? And we're going to continue that. We did a thing on the election, before the election. That was in what, I guess October, or was it early November? Dr. K was here for our Asada Shakur, a discussion of her book. And that was anyway, let me stop saying these were all interesting. Anyway, Black Studies Canon in December, Focus on Africa, Part 2, or Black Studies Canon, Part 2, Focus on Africa. We had Dr. Logan come and join us. Jakia Marie, who's, like I say, she's my unofficial co-host. She doesn't happen to be here today, but like we always like to have her involved. And then in February, this was the thing that the whole PAS and Friend Conversations in Black thing was actually even leading to, or was built around, was doing something big for Malcolm X at 100. And so we did that on Saturday, February the 22nd, the day after the commemorating the date of his assassination. I almost said anniversary. That's not cool. And so speaking of that, just before we launch into our SNCC conversation, so the next installment then of PAS and Friends Conversations in Black will be coming up on Monday, May 19th. We're breaking the schedule as far as doing these things on Saturday. So we will actually, on the actual 100th birthday of Malcolm X in the evening, we will have another series. We will launch another series, the Malcolm X Inquiries, Volume 1, because Malcolm X likes SNCC, one of those topics that there needs to be multiple episodes of to even touch upon exploring. And so anyway, that's coming up, I guess a month from now. And we're going to launch that, since we're the Pan-African Studies Department, we're going to launch that, a conversation around Pan-Africanism, the OAU, the OAAU, and Pan-Africanism. Malcolm X obviously is that. So we'll have more to say about that, but just that's coming up a month from now. And anybody on the mailing list, or anybody wants to email us or get on a mailing list to make sure, definitely do that, because we certainly, there's a lot of work for us to be done in terms of spreading the word out. We know it hasn't really gotten out as widely as it could have. That's something we certainly want to work on. Anyway, that's coming up in a month. But let's get back to the issue at hand, which is the SNCC Chronicles, Volume 1, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And we say birth of the movement because, yes, in April, that is when the organization was officially founded, coming, what shall we say, not on the heels of, but in the midst of a broad movement across the South on the part of Black college students, the sit-in movement. All right, we'll say more about that. Let me see. What would I want to say right quick? These pictures, all of these pictures here, I think, are going to work their way into our conversation today. Some sisters sitting in. We'll talk, anyway, James Foreman's, anyway, blah, blah, blah. This picture in the middle, we'll definitely get that later on. The famous picture of Ann Moody, the author of the book Coming of Age in Mississippi. Anyway, that's her getting the beat down in Jackson in 1963. Anyway, let me stop. Let's move on. All right, so what are we doing? What are we trying to do today? So, like I said, we're launching a series on the organization itself, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We're going to focus on the early days, the first few months, really, right? Even before, we're going to focus on that period before there was a SNCC and then the founding of SNCC. That's really the most of what we really want to accomplish today in our conversation. And there's a lot to cover. And why are we doing this? What's that all about? So, I feel, let me speak personally on this, this story, the story of SNCC, the story of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, is not a story that's just relevant to veterans of the movement. It's not a story just relevant to scholars, people who, academic careers around writing about the civil rights movement. It is a part of our collective history, right? And so, as a Black Studies Department, as a Pan-African Studies Department, a Black Studies Department, then SNCC, as I see it, is part of really the basic curriculum in terms of talking about history, in terms of talking about our history, having a grip on what they were about and the issues that are involved in that particular period of time. That's something essential to really even just having a basic knowledge of who we are, our history, our past, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why we're starting the SNCC Chronicles. It is a lot. I mean, that's 10 years. That's 10 years that it covers, but there's so much that happens. There's so many distinct chapters that are of great relevance. There's so many specific contributions. There's so many essential moments in terms of the history of Black struggle that occur as a part of this organization, or a part of that decade. And the organization itself goes through such a significant change, one exhibited by even the two photos, the two pictures we have up here, right? This is one of the early, what's the word, emblems or pictures of SNCC. You know, the white hand and the black hand shaking together. That's a symbol that they used for many years. But then in the middle period, we get to 66 or so, and the message is a little different, and that's relevant to our story, right? The brother needs you, and his two black hands as well. That says something about the history that's going to be traversed in that period of time. Couple of books here that are very important. So, just to mention, right, anyone who's unfamiliar, if the story of SNCC is interesting at all, then like really, I still think the starting point, still, what is it, 44 years later, is Claiborne Corson's classic book, In Struggle, SNCC and the Black Awakening of America. That certainly opened my eyes many, many years ago as well. Anyway, I'll stop there. The other picture here, another important book, The Making of Black Revolutionaries by James Forman. What was he? The executive secretary, I believe is the title that he had for many years throughout SNCC. And he's one of the essential, what's the word, figures, certainly in terms of talking about the movement during that period. That's just a thing right quick. Within SNCC, that organization, there are so many specific individuals who themselves made very important contributions. I mean, it's a large number of people. James Forman, one of the most important, but by no means the only one. And so I interjected a picture here in the middle. This is what we would call like, this puts us around 66 or 67 with, I guess at that point, that you would call that the SNCC Brain Trust. You see Stokely Carmichael in the foreground. Next door, you see Ruby Doris Robinson, one of the very important and I guess kind of legendary, because she died young, of figures in SNCC's history. Cleve Sellers, there's a lot to say about him over the course of the SNCC Chronicles. Author of, anyway, let me stop doing all of this. And Mr. James Forman himself kind of in the background there. Just a sense of, in terms of the importance of this topic, and the reason why we're actually spending a little bit of time today launching a series in which we actually take on various aspects of the history of this thing, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And, did y'all want to react to any of the images or anything here before we actually be launching to our series of propositions that we shall discuss? Any? You don't have to. We can move on if you like. Okay. You missed your chance. We're moving on. All right. So our conversation, we have, I think, 11 propositions that we want to discuss. And I'm sure that as we move along, I will probably have to cut out a couple of these propositions. But it's organized around just kind of some specific topics, some sort of specific questions that allow us to just have a general picture of this phenomenon. And like I say, today, in terms of launching the SNCC Chronicles, we actually are just focusing on the very beginning. And so here's something that here's a proposition that, like, I think puts us center into, I think, what are kind of the mainstream narratives about the civil rights movement. So let me put it to you all and see how you all react to it. Proposition number one, it was Black college students who started the modern civil rights movement. not Montgomery, not Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King. These people were important, but that doesn't actually start the actual modern civil rights movement. Proposition number one. How do you all how do you all react?
Um, well, let me ask, how are we defining the modern civil rights movement? Like
Well,
what?
that is here's the thing. That comes next. So
Okay,
so
okay,
you
okay, okay,
don't have that to rely on. You just have to answer this.
okay, okay.
What you got?
I don't. Well, I mean, I think in terms of what I research, I might be partial to saying yes. I think that in earnest, when we get to the sit-in movement, in terms of the evolution of the protest tactic that is direct action movement, that then springs forward the protest that follows, yes, right? The insertion of youth that changes the whole dynamic of the movement, yes. Um, but I'm still so I want to teeter till we get to modern, and then maybe I'll come back and revise, right? Um,
Yes, yeah.
um, because you're not saying that Rosa Parks and all of that is not important. Um, but if part of what, when we think about these young people and we think about the ways in which they were politicized, maybe by what happens in Montgomery, definitely what happens with Emmett Till, and they are the Emmett Till generation, right? Does
Yep.
that hold some level of importance in terms of maybe, you know, that being the beginnings of the modern movement, right? Because that is the thing that many cite in terms of I was politicized by that, right? I knew that this could be possible because of that, right? And then so how much weight do we hold to the fact that prior movements build concurrently, right? Movements as they go forward, and people take pieces and parts and whatever, and and sort of cobble together what works for them, and then sort of make that their own. So, um, yes and no. That might not be an answer, but yes and no is my answer.
That's
So,
good.
so yeah. So I'll let Dr. McCormick weigh in.
Yeah, y'all answer how you choose. Like I say, this is a conversation, and these are just like the nodes, you
Yeah.
know, that we organize it around.
Yes, I appreciate that. What Dr. Kenshin has already said. I laugh because Dr. Tukweme has phrased these as propositions, and perhaps they're more provocations, if we know him and his way of moving. So they're provocations as much as they are propositions, and so we've been provoked to respond as to the truth value of the propositions that have been put forward, and I appreciate that because that's good grist for the mill. I am not an historian by training in the way that Dr. Kenshin is, and so these conversations of periodization and historicity and so on and so forth are not necessarily how I approach a topic. I'm trained in religion and history and critical theories of religion, and so it is interesting though, insofar as a good scholar of religion, the notion of origin stories comes to mind, and the ways that origin stories are always contested. How do we tell a certain origin of a narrative and its genealogy? And so I think you're right to say that there's a certain kind of origin story that places Rosa Parks at the beginning of the movement, and you want to complicate and contest that and insert a potential different origin story here in Greensboro and with this sit-in movement. I think I think to Dr. Kenshin's point, both and are true. I think they're even the notion that Rosa Parks is the origin, right, of the modern civil rights movement is problematic in many ways because we know that um, there has been all kinds of work done prior to even the 1950s that lay the groundwork for civil rights work to emerge in the 1950s. And so if I think about another good religious studies figure and scholar and historian, our dear brother Vincent Harding, the late Vincent Harding, who in There Is a River and wants to talk about the long Black freedom struggle, right, and the kind of continuum of which there are these ebbs and flows and moments. And so as part of a long Black freedom struggle, the civil rights movement itself is only one moment, and I think there are moments that lead to that, and a kind of inflection point is what happens when Rosa Parks, sits down on that bus, and then everything that happens in Montgomery after that. And I think another inflection point and perhaps an intensification, right, we might say, of that movement is what's happening in Greensboro and the students. And so, and I think it does a couple of other things too. So if even the way that's framed, right, Rosa Parks and MLK, which are about these kind of central figures, or especially MLK being this kind of central charismatic figure that is a figurehead of a movement, versus a story about the Greensboro Four or student activists who are more decentralized and not organized around a particular figure, that changes the conversation about how activism is happening, even if we might tell that story in terms of Ella Baker, which comes up later in terms of her role as a kind of central and decentralized and decentralizing figure in the movement. But I think both starting points or both origin stories are important here. If for no other reason, and I'll just lay this in here too, as we talk about gender and gender dynamics, right? So I certainly wouldn't want to erase Rosa Parks from the story, right? In ways that we erase, central Black women from the history of these movements and their origins, even though we know that Rosa Parks is not the origin there, even in terms of women in the movement. But Sister Parks certainly plays her important role, and these student activists intensify that work and have maybe another beginning point for that work.
Okay. No, that's interesting. So I guess just to to explain a little bit of the pictures as well. So yeah, we have the picture of the Greensboro Four there. These are the four people who, on February 1st, 1960, in Greensboro, North Carolina, in protest to the racist discrimination. Of the Woolworths there downtown, they said, we're just going to sit here and we're not going to get up until we're served, and we're just going to see what happens here. But we just ain't taking it no more. They didn't have necessarily what you'll call a master plan or anything, but it was just they decided that, hey, listen, let's do something. There's all this conversation about equal rights, but nobody's doing anything, right? So that's part of the thinking there. I'm gonna do a quote. I'm gonna read a quote by Franklin McCain in a second. What did I want to add here as well? So the proposition is based around a notion. So I'm getting a little bit into our next slide, but just to make the point here, the reason why someone might say this, they would be considering the modern civil rights movement to be, in fact, the era of direct action, right? The era of actually we're going to, we're personally going to stand in the way of unjust laws, and we will, face the repercussions of arrest. So direct action against us. That's really when people think of what's happening in '60 in terms of the confrontation between the people and the system. That's really that. Like the Montgomery bus boycott is a famous story, and it makes people famous, and it is an example, as you all alluded to. Certainly, it's an example of a concerted action, long term, on the part of a Black community, and so it's definitely an episode. Let me read Franklin McCain talking. Franklin McCain, one of the guys in the Greensboro Four. Let me find this little quote right quick. All right, I'm going to just read a short quote. Anyway, the movement started out as a movement of nonviolence and as a Christian movement, and we wanted to make that very clear to everybody that it was a movement that was seeking justice more than anything else, and not a movement to start a war. We knew that probably the most powerful and potent weapon that people have literally no defense for is love, kindness. That is, whip the enemy with something that he doesn't understand. The individual who had probably the most influence on us was Gandhi, more than any single individual. During the time that the Montgomery bus boycott was in effect, we were tots for the most part. We barely heard of Martin Luther King. Yes, Martin Luther King's name was well known when the sit-in movement was in effect, but to pick out Martin Luther King as a hero, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm about to say. Yes, Martin Luther King was a hero. No, he was not the individual we had upmost in mind when we started the sit-in movement. So that's McCain talking later on, you know.
It sounds like a later on quote.
Yeah, but
that's his experience, right? But I'm saying when you read it, I could tell it sounded like somebody who had some distance from the movement, right? Like, because the A&T for, which I want to say too, right? As an HBCU grad, we don't want to credit the city, we credit A&T, right? So, and an A&T grad would probably take exception with calling them the Greensboro for, right? The A&T for,
okay.
I mean, their story within themselves in terms of like after this thing blows up and they become less and less central and what that means to their story, their personal story, and how they view that, right?
Yep.
And so when I hear that, understanding their context in terms of they're not in the leadership after this goes forward, they're not central. Of course, they are almost like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King in terms of the Montgomery story. This is a great origin story in terms of what happens, right? But they don't necessarily get to do outside of, they started it and then we took it to another place, right? And that's something that these men had struggled with as the years had gone on, right? And so, I mean, I hear that. I'm not devaluing that. That's his experience. And we'll talk about like maybe the SNCC organizing meeting, but when King comes to the meeting, they treat King at the meeting like he is, you know, God on earth, right? So like maybe in that moment, I'm not thinking about King, but this is not like, oh, King was somebody in Montgomery. We kind of knew who he was, but we really didn't, right? When they organized the meeting at Shaw, he comes to Shaw. Everybody's like, King is here, right? Like the champ is here, right? And so there is a certain, as the kids would say today, aura, right? That King has that, you know, to me, it sounds like a lot of that's going on, right? We've been sort of marginalized in the history book. King is here, and so when we did it, we weren't even thinking about this guy who went on to get all the glory, right? We had our own place, we had our own thoughts, we had our own autonomy and our own agency when we did it, which they did. But I'm just saying, it does sound like, you know, there are more motivations going on in terms of that quote than just on the surface is what it reads to me.
Okay,
it's the work of the critical historian, complicating the narratives, even the narratives that are meant to complicate the narratives that we're telling. Dr. Kenshin is raising questions of motives and intentions. I appreciate that. Kwame, it sounded like you wanted to move, but and this may be taking us away from the trajectory that you were thinking about, but I'm also thinking about, because Dr. Kenshin evoked HBCUs, right, and being an HBCU grad, and I'm just even looking at the slide and the way it's framed in terms of Black college students, HBCUs, you know, students, and thinking about maybe the complex or complicated roles that HBCUs did or did not play, right, within the emergence of these movements and the sit-ins and the like. And so maybe to what degree is that the context where these students were, right, because they are in proximity to one another as Black students in the South, and who are thinking about the conditions in which they're living and how they want to transform and change them. But is there, and right, they're at Black schools, but is there something about the administration or the curriculum of these HBCUs that is encouraging these kinds of actions, or in fact, are they interested in constraining those actions and in fact pushing a more conservative tact for their students in that moment? And so do HBCUs facilitate that? Sure, but maybe it's the students who are at HBCUs more so than the HBCUs themselves, which is not to cast aspersions or shade upon HBCUs, but I think it's always to tell a complicated story about the politics of HBCUs and how they and their relationship to the movements and struggles.
Well, you asked
As we might see even in today's news with NCCU, right, and students protesting now for their living conditions at North Carolina Central, and their arrest most recently on that college campus, as those students who are the heirs of that of those sit-ins there in North Carolina are being arrested on their own HBCU campus for protesting the conditions that they're forced to live in.
Yeah, well, I mean, later on, this is actually one of the propositions that actually just might have to get cut, but you kind of got there, so we'll see how it goes. I know we got to get to Proposition 8 by 2:20, right? So we got to do that, and so we're still in Proposition number 1. But the one, well, there's a couple 2 points in what you all said, and then we'll move on a little bit. One is in terms of talking about HBCUs, and I'm not really an expert on this, but I think you really do have to draw this clear distinction between these people, these young kids who attend these institutions and the administration of these institutions. I think those are really two different forces, right? So you're right, it's a complex question to get in there in terms of talking about the HBCU. If you say HBCU's relationship to the civil rights movement, then the first thing you got to do is distinguish between the students and the administration. So there's that. We'll see if we can develop that a little bit further. The one, I think, response I would have, all the things you all are saying is all good. The one thing I think I would add to what Charlotta was saying here, in terms of the King thing and how, they looked up to him and all of that. So, I guess I just say it like this. I mean, one thing that has absolutely damaged the history and historiography of the civil rights movement is everybody buying into the celebrity of Martin Luther King and not really interrogating that thing as something very distinct from the individual, right? The creation of this celebrity. I'm not here, this is not casting aspersions on his character at all, but the absolute singularity of King, and yeah, King, he's one of the biggest celebrities in the country, man. So, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if Sammy Davis Jr. had shown up in 1960 in Raleigh, that would have been a big deal. I'm not equating Sammy Davis Jr. and Martin Luther King, except to establish this thing, this celebrity thing, right? And it was, I'm not saying that it distorted the history as it transpired. This was just one of the facts of life that you had this international celebrity, who was a part of this civil rights movement. I mean, that has its impact. What I'm saying is the historiography. I'm saying everybody tells the story now, and they absolutely make this guy an absolutely central character of the whole thing. And it's not really like that. Like I say, the thing that he has, like, it's apart from him as a person. But this international celebrity, right? I mean, that's something, well, let me stop. So that's something, so all that to say, in terms of saying everybody really looked up to him in April, yeah, because this is an international celebrity. This is a guy on the cover of Time magazine, right?
For sure.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
So
For sure.
there's that. So I don't know.
But I'm only talking about early 1960, right? So maybe other SNCC Chronicles, we will get more into the contested relationship between maybe even today, if we're talking about Ella Baker and King, but if we're talking about Snick and King, maybe we'll get more into the contested relationship there that develops. But my emphasis is more on the fact that maybe to even continue to use the word contested is the A&T's for contested space within the civil rights movement, right? So who's
Okay.
asking them that? When are they asking them that? Are they asking them that? Because very much so, you know, they are
Well,
seen as this flashpoint in the movement, right? And I think they see themselves, or they saw themselves erased in a way in which, if you're talking to them 20 years, 25, right? If you're talking to them down the line, conversation is different because
okay.
we feel that we've been erased from the narrative, right?
All
That
right.
we're just these four that sat in and then, right? And so the emphasis is less on the fact that they may have, had, saw King in a certain light, whatever. More on the fact that, it's contested, right? It's,
No,
yeah,
no.
yeah,
I think you
yeah,
got. I think
yeah,
you're
yeah,
right
yeah, yeah, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
So before leaving this slide, so this image here, February 1. That's what the cover of a documentary on these guys, and it's not really all that well known. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something that like anybody who's interested in our general topic. Anyway, it's something that everybody needs to watch, and you'll get more familiar with it. So I mean, I don't know, it's general accessibility, but it's anyway. You should look it up if you're unfamiliar with what we're talking about. You should look up February 1 because that'll give you another lens. And I'll get into a little bit of what Dr. K is talking about here, actually. So let me see. All right, let's move on to not this. So let's do this for a minute. I can see now. Yeah, we're in trouble already, time wise. Um, Big time. All right. So anyway, I'm going to give us exactly 5 minutes and no more. I'm cutting this off at 1:42. It don't matter how eloquent you are in the middle of that. So let me not take all of the 5 minutes up. What is the modern civil rights movement, right? I mean, so we have this specialized conversation that takes place amongst academics for whom the civil rights movement is a topic, right? I don't really know how far outside of those academic circles, um, some of this specialized information and research really travels necessarily. But of course, there are many conceptions of the civil rights movement, and of course, all of them, if complicated. You can't really fix as McCormick as you were saying earlier. Yeah, there ain't no really such thing as some real fixed origin moment. So you got that. You talk to activists, you might hear something different. Um, and if you talk to black people generally out here, civil rights movement, I really don't think the civil rights movement, as a general proposition, goes past recognizing the name Rosa Parks,
Mm-hmm.
I Have a Dream and Martin Luther King, and maybe some images from Birmingham, in terms of like, how they were attacking those kids with police dogs. Maybe. I don't know if it goes past that. I do know that, like, I mean, central figures like these people here. I mean, you talk Dr. K. You were talking about marginalized figures, so like Robert Williams, right? And that chapter. That chapter gets no run hardly whatsoever. I mean, you once again, you got to talk to people who have to have almost specialized knowledge to be familiar with Robert Williams. And I would say that also includes a large percentage of people who would claim actual familiarity with the civil rights movement. I mean, Gloria Richardson in Cambridge, Maryland, in the middle here, I mean, still, I think we're in the specialized, only people with specialized knowledge know about. But these are like some absolutely essential stories of this period. These are just two absolutely essential stories of this period that certainly are not part of the common understanding. I'll stop with just this part here. So, I mean, probably a lot of people listening or watching or viewing, have you say that, would be familiar with the video series, Eyes on the Prize. I think there might be like 14 episodes or so. But if not, that's something, once again, like in terms of, what's the word, like increasing your education. This is like, as I wrote there, like required for basic American historical knowledge there as well. So, um, all that. Well, you know what? I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop because I've already. So you can respond to. There's no. You know, if y'all want to like deal more into anyway, whatever. Okay, I'm stopping. I'm stopping.
Well, I don't know what to do. It's 140, and I know you are going to cut this at 142 regardless. So I hesitate to even wade into those waters.
Pick one thing. Pick one thing and get your little thing on.
Well, yeah, I mean, according to scholars, activists, and Black people generally, I like that demarcation because those are very different answers to that. And that I think that you would get. I think, according to Black people generally, maybe I'll start. I mean, I think maybe Black folk may say most generally it's a move to fight for equal rights and integration into society that goes somewhere between 1955 and 1968. I think that's what you would get from most Black folk that you ask in
I
terms of
doubt
that.
that very seriously, but go ahead.
Well, okay, so the general educated populace of Black folk, how about that? Might say that. And I do think you're raising something very important here when you talk about according to scholars, because there becomes all kinds of sub disciplines, right? From those who were talking about Black studies to historians to civil rights scholars to, right? I mean, real nuances within even how we understand civil rights or Black power or any of those periodizations. So I think we get very complex stories there. And I'll only say in terms of eyes on the prize, I appreciate that. I remember as undergraduates, that whole series would be shown over a week when I was an undergrad at U of L. I'm not sure if PAS sponsored that, but I think we'd be hard pressed to find students now who have seen any part of that or even heard of it. Maybe
There
we
you
need to
go.
return to that and show that in the theater again for undergraduates over a week.
That sounds like a good idea. The only I know I'm interjecting, but like as good as eyes as good as essential as eyes on the prize is, they too completely ignore Gloria Richardson and Robert Williams. You know, they felt like they had no time for these stories. I said I was going to stop, and I'm stopping. Dr. K, any reaction to that? Was a bunch. You got.
Is it 42?
Don't worry about it. I mean,
I'll go from a scholar perspective, because that's been debated conversation, in terms of what is the modern civil rights movement, and maybe not so much that, but long civil rights movement, and then so going back to the long civil rights movement and sort of getting out of the periodization that is 54 to 65. Historians have generally gone back to say, okay, there is a long civil rights movement. We have to look at the antecedents of the movement. And then we've gotten so lost in the long civil rights movement that we have now convoluted the modern civil rights movement, or we've sort of gotten away from the modern civil rights movement, right? And so, I start when I teach my class and I say, okay, we are going to study the long civil rights movement, but the modern movement to me does start at Brown.
Right.
For me, in the sense of the way in which, and we could talk about application of Brown another time, but in terms of the ways in which the decision itself sparked the movement, right? So for me, it's Brown, and then we move on from there. And I'll just stop there so we can go forward.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm always very ambitious with these conversations. Um, like I said, this is still like what critical information discussing Proposition One. But anyway, like I say, this is the beginning of the SNCC Chronicles. But there's all this stuff that's happening before Ella Baker ever like organizes this conference that results in SNCC, right? So from February the 1st, when the guys from North Carolina A&T started that, it just happened to be in the town of Greensboro, North Carolina. Uh, Look at, I mean, these are some of the numbers, right? 55 cities and 13 states. And we don't even, I'm just putting this here. We don't even have time to develop this. But when these guys do this thing in February of 1960, they aren't actually the first youth to actually do this, because in the Midwest, you got this stuff going on. It doesn't actually lead to a broader, national and regional movement, but in Oklahoma, in Kansas, I perhaps in Nebraska, but certainly in those two states, you can find images about that. But like from February 1st, right? There was four of them. I forget the exact number. The second day there was either 9 or 16 of them, and by the end of the week, we're in the hundreds, and this thing will start to spread across. So this thing, these youth, and let me expand this map just for a second, just to get a sense of what we're talking about here as well, right? So this thing is just from, let me see, I got to move this to see. This is just the first couple of months. And you may not be able to see it well, but just to say that from January to, no, from February to April, all over, right? You have this thing spread. And so this is one reason why somebody might go with Proposition 1 and say, yeah, this is the real start. You're talking about mass activism in deliberate confrontation with the system. That's really the modern civil rights movement in terms of virtually all the images that people would know. So that would be why somebody might hold that particular position. But I think every point that you all made in terms of saying, well, it can't really be that simple, is right on. But I was just trying to, I'm just saying, here's why people might say that something really does change. And so let's go to proposition number 2 right quick. The sit-ins spread spontaneously and were primarily local affairs. So we got a couple of headlines up for you, a couple of pictures. We're from Nashville, from Arlington, Virginia. In the middle is a book cover from a brother down in Jacksonville, Florida, Dr. K's hometown. And anyway, his book, it was never about a hot dog and a Coke, in which he recounts what's going on in 1960. He has some interesting things to say, actually. But let me stop and have you all consider the proposition, and I'm sure you all will talk about how it's complicated. But go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll go. I think when we look at the ANT4, many of those young men have been involved in some level with NAACP youth chapters, which often gets left out of the narrative, right? I think there might be one book that discusses NAACP youth chapters, and they're kind of, the youth chapters are kind of, left out of the narrative. And before we get SNCC, many of the youth who had any kind of organizing background, they were a part of the NAACP youth chapters, right? And so, right. So, like I said, so several of those who were in the ANT4 were part of, NAACP youth chapters. You mentioned Nashville. Nashville is getting ready to kick off before we get the ANT4, right? We get James Lawson, we get the Nashville movement, the Nashville organizing nucleus, who are already training, who are already prepared, and they're already getting ready to start before, again, this thing kind of explodes, right? And so, yeah, there's a level of spontaneity to it, right? And the level of people who are maybe not sophisticated in terms of their political orientation and or organizing, that are moved and called to action, right? But and local, right? In terms of the proposition of primarily local affairs, right? What happens in North Carolina, and we got to consider North Carolina as North Carolina A&T, as North Carolina Central, as Johnson C. Smith, as Bennett, as, right, we have this hub of HBCUs that exists down in North Carolina that catch the fever, catch the fire of what's happening in terms of the sit-ins, right? So there's a yes and yeah, there's a yes and no to that, right? In terms of, uh, yes, there's a level of political sophistication that may not exist in all of the students, but there is some organizing that's already taken place. You had here, I think, Oklahoma City 58. That's Clara Looper, right? Like there are things that are happening in isolation that then I think creates the atmosphere that then leads into the 60s, 1960 sit-in movement.
No,
Um,
that's a fact. No, that's a fact. And the other thing, and what's the Alvin Morris? I think that's his name. The origins of the civil rights
Portion of the
movement.
civil rights
Is that right?
movement.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that he added, I think this is him adding to the discourse, uh, was to say, well, yes, but at the same time, you have to acknowledge, some of these, there are all these networks. And so going back to proposition number one, in terms of saying, the modern civil rights movement started with the kids, a counter argument certainly is, well, there's necessarily what you would call a lot of mass action happening in the years after the Montgomery bus boycott, right? So like young people are certainly saying, well, that was a long time ago, and what are we doing now? But the fact is, one reason why the sit-in movement was able to spread like that was, like I say, these existing networks, not just the kids, but like these adults. So you talked about the NAACP youth councils. Ella Baker, one reason why she's able to pull this thing together is because, she has for years been involved with support for movement activity in the South. And so it's a combination. Like you said, the real answer is it's a combination. So they were local affairs in most places. They did. Students did. Many students did. Like, hey, let's start doing something. At the same time, you did have these networks once February 1st happens and say, hey, well, really, that first week, let's just say, you say, then people are calling and everybody say, hey, listen, right? Okay, what are y'all going to do there in whatever, San Antonio, that kind of thing. And so that's a part of why this thing spread so rapidly in just a couple of months. Yes, youthful energy, but also the truth is, as you were pointing out, pre-existing networks were definitely activated to try to, what's the word? To try to accelerate activity. So that's the real, part of the story.
And can I say this just real quick about my hometown?
Yeah, but I want to talk about this thing here for a second. But go ahead. You know what?
Okay. No, so the director of the youth council was a man by the name of Rutledge Pearson.
Rutledge Pearson, yes, sir. Yes,
sir. Yeah. And he was actually like one of my father's teachers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so no, and so just to say that we have Edward Waters in Jacksonville, but it's not a large HBCU. So when we get outside of like SNCC, and again, we know early on there is no SNCC, there are just students kind of moving in action. Right. Jacksonville is not a student-centered type place, right? It's not like a college student-centered type city. Yep. It very much is an NAACP-led organizational city, right? In terms of like who's leading the movement there, who's in charge of the movement there. And so when we talk about like how does this thing spread and what and who facilitates this thing and like the spontaneity of it and are people organized in a certain way, I look at Jacksonville and these kids were organized by Rutledge Pearson, who was not only the director there, but someone who was in the leadership on a national level, right? So when it was time to go, they were ready to go because they were already organized by a seasoned organizer,
That's an excellent point. And back to Rodney Hurst's book, was it over here? It was never about a hot dog and a Coke. Rutledge Pearson is like the hero of that book. You know what I mean? He's a major figure there as well. And so I mean, I didn't know anything about any of the stuff in Jacksonville until I started really doing work on this particular program. And so, I also never heard of this infamous incident
Mm-hmm.
from Jacksonville, Axe Handle Saturday, when the mob sets upon the protesters with, I mean, they're loaded with like what, hundreds or
Mm-hmm.
scores of
Yeah.
axe handles and bats, and they're beating people down. Uh, and the police just sat by and let it happen from August of 1960. Let me just have you all listen to, watch a 30 second or so, what I'm trying to say, clip from a little documentary on this Axe Handle Saturday thing. So this is, anyway, I'll let this play.
Almost no film footage survives of Axe Handle Saturday. Almost no photographs. What little there is remained locked away for half a century, until now. August 27th, 1960. A horrifying day in Jacksonville history. The day white men, hundreds of them, roamed our city's downtown streets and beat blacks bloody with axe handles.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm going like, I'm not going to feel bad about not knowing about this particular atrocity. You know what I mean? Because the number of atrocities, right, that's been inflicted on us in this country is incalculable. Nonetheless, I hadn't heard anything about this. So that documentary is on YouTube in case anybody's interested and wants to check it out. Rodney Hurst is one of the main figures. And, in addition to talking about how Rutledge Pearson really is kind of really the critical figure there, I mean, I thought some of his organizational policies, because he was like, hey, I be reading in these books where they say SNCC organized down here. SNCC had nothing to do with what we were doing down here in Jacksonville. Anyway, I digress. I want to go to this, and Brandon, are you from Louisville? Are you from here?
I'm from Kentucky. I was born in Danville, then lived in Frankfort, and made Louisville home when I came here as an undergrad. So been here for
Okay.
a long time, and it's been home. But unless you're born and raised and went to high school in Louisville, they will not let you claim to be a Louisvillian for real, for real.
Oh, that's
Even
fine.
though I've
That's
been
fine.
here longer than a lot of these folks have been alive.
I heard that. I heard that. Well, I mean, I also knew nothing really about Louisville's. I guess it's more than just a sit-in campaign, but sitting in was a part of the game there. Part of the protest activity occurring there. So anyway, this is, you know, a lot of times people think like the sit-in movement was just a 1960 thing and it was resolved, and the answer is emphatically no. Anyway, this is just for those of us who might have some Louisville connection, some pictures from the Louisville protest movement, which seemed to have peaked in 1961. Anyway, all the segregation. So we got people, sitting in at some restaurant. This picture down here is all these young people who've been arrested. This is a picture from the police station. People have been arrested for these protests. The Blue Boar was this restaurant that didn't let Negroes attend. You got the kids out here blocking the entrance. They're blocking the entrance of some department store here, and yeah, that campaign, they're trying to get black people not to shop downtown. The Nothing New for Easter campaign of spring 1961. I don't know. I don't know how much this is salient in Louisville's conception of itself in terms of its protest movement and such like that. What do you think, as someone who's lived here for many years? Is this part of Louisville's
I'm not
self?
sure that it gets a lot of public commentary in terms of this particular chapter of Louisville history. I think there are pockets of folks who do Louisville history. I mean, in Dr. Hudson's work and Black, even 2 centuries of Black Louisville, and those kinds of things like that. And people who are specific kind of Kentucky and Louisville historians, but I don't think in the general public and conversation, these are widely known narratives. So I'm really appreciating a lot of the things that you're bringing to us on these slides. And I mean, that axe handle, that axe handle situation was fascinating. Axe handle Saturday. I'm only surprised that they removed the axe heads before they came to do the massacre. But I
Yeah,
also just think,
they
I
have
mean,
murder charges. Yeah, but then again,
yeah,
why would that have
and
upset them
this
either? So that
Louisville piece here, even I mean, and being particularly intriguing, being that this is also Easter weekend,
ah,
and just thinking about the idea of young people protesting around Easter. And again, we may come back into the kind of the religious roots and relationship of the movement, to the sit-ins and how religion did or didn't play into it. But I think this is really interesting. There's nothing new for Easter and these protests of these stores. I mean, even as we're thinking about, we certainly don't see any contemporary Easter protests these days, but I think we are, living in the midst of boycotts of Target and other places like that are, more contemporary expressions of that. Although I suspect that Black folk are going to get their Easter outfits
One way or
from
the other.
somewhere, if not from Target.
oh my God.
And just real quick, a couple of years ago, Asala was in Jacksonville,
Yeah.
and so that park we were at, Brandon, is where that took place.
Oh, this happened. That was it. What, James Weldon
Yeah,
Johnson Park?
it was called Hemming Plaza back in the day,
Oh wow.
and they changed it to James Weldon Johnson, but that's where that took place.
Oh wow. That's good to be able to place it there. I wish they were having the Tequeme, the read-in there, the banned book read-in there in the park that we went to when we all went down for Asala a couple of years back.
All right, cool. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this one,
I think
but
we've already gotten at it somewhat.
but yeah, going back to like according to scholars, I mean, no scholar's gonna say that. No activist is gonna say that unless they were an SCLC specifically, right? But you talk about like the general conversation, which is so parched, right? Which is so devoid of information. No, man, you put this out there and people say, yeah. Even in Atlanta, people say, yeah. Right? And in particular, like I said, I'm going to move on just because we got time to go. But yeah, King was not the leader of the students. A lot of them looked up to him, as you all have said. But yeah, there's some person wrote this article and said he led the Atlanta student movement, which is, I mean, that's just that is so patently absurd, in terms of they had to put a lot of effort to like get him to join one of their demonstrations. So that's absurd, and that's part of the vast ignorance that I have been hinting at that stalks this land. You know what? This will take us this will take us too much time to get into. So this is just the kind of thing, if we're trying to keep a conversation right to a certain length of time, y'all kind of started this. So let's just leave this as a hint for people, because I think you all have kind of made some general points about that. But we don't have time to get into it because, listen, I would love to. I mean, I think a conversation about Black institutions or Negro or Black or Afro. Anyway, Black institutions and their relationship to our history and to the progressive struggle. I just think there's a lot of Black institutional propaganda that shapes so much of the narrative, right? This whole association of the Black church with the freedom movement, as opposed to specific individuals within the Black church. And similarly, in terms of talking about the HBCUs, right? The students, some administrations. That's not the general picture. But like I say, we don't have time to do it. And I see Brendan frothing at the mouth there, but we moving on, man.
Oh no, man.
Moving on. Because we got to get to, what did I say, Proposition 8?
Yeah, so I see these may be some reworded propositions from the original ones that I saw. So I'll be intrigued to see how they've developed.
Not that far, really. This is going to be a quick one too, right? The answer to no. No, right? You know what I mean? Like, and the pictures even demonstrate it. So, like I said, there's a larger picture of Jackson, Mississippi in 1963.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, this is kind of a famous photograph. And like I say, Ann Moody's book, this one here, getting whatever that is, mustard in her dew. Um, Coming of age in Mississippi is like one of the classic, narratives, one of the classic texts that I would say everybody should read. I should have put a picture of it up here. Anyway, these pictures are just supporting the fact that that proposition is completely untenable. But once again, well, I don't even know. If you say sit-in movement and, when did that happen? I mean, I don't know, man. I think if we step outside of specific uh, academic departments or courses, I mean, I don't think we're clocking more than 7% of the general U.S. populace, including black people, for whom the sit-in movement is anything more than just a word. They couldn't like to say like so. Even this proposition, it began and ended in 1960. You know what I mean? People be looking at me. People were looking at you blankly, like, what are you talking about? But if we push that ahead in terms of people who claim to have some knowledge or would want to claim some knowledge about the civil rights movement, they might be able to do, February 1st, 1960, the sit-in movement, and they won. So so there's probably some percentage of people, if they had even some degree of history to be able to even talk about sit-in movement in terms of a specific point in time, might have go for this. But this is completely untenable, of course. That's one of the stories of the so-called civil rights movement and of the 1960s, is in fact the consistent defeat, right, of black activists, and certainly in terms of segregation. No, not by a long shot. Yes, it did happen in Nashville. Yes, I think it happened in a few other towns. The only one I can really specifically cite is Nashville, but as a general proposition, as you can see, the answer to that is no. And that leads to just mentioning, let's go from 1960 all the way down to 1968. And some of you, well, here's another story in American history that like so few people know. As it was known in history, the Orangeburg Massacre, when these students who were protesting segregation at the local bowling alley are going to get shot down by the police, by the South Carolina Highway Patrolmen, killed 27 others wounded. They railroaded Cleveland Sellers, standing here next to the plaque. We saw him earlier, railroaded him. They were going to try to give him life. He ended up serving, I don't know, I think it wasn't in jail for that many years, actually, and he certainly was able to go on and overcome that and have a very successful life, even becoming the president of, was it Voorhees? The black college in, I don't remember what that, somewhere. Anyway, there's that. So anyway, the Orangeburg Massacre. So there's a documentary about that. Like if somebody's listening saying, damn, I don't know anything about that. Scarred Justice, the Orangeburg Massacre, 1968, made by some of the same people, who helped to put Eyes on the Prize together. That's around. It might be difficult. I think it might be difficult actually to watch, but that's something to have some knowledge of. And just in terms of anyone listening to us, and probably not anybody listening to us would go for a silly proposition such as this. But, like I say, you have these sort of struggles taking place years and years later, even years after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which supposedly abolished racial discrimination in public accommodations, among other things. So anyway, that was an easily handled proposition. So I can give us a little bit of time for 6. Let me see what 7 is. You know what? I think we can do this. Between 6 and 7, because I said we get to 8. We need the proposition 8. So we got 11 minutes for this. We can't get around it, right? The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They actually named themselves the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I put Gandhi here, kind of referencing the Franklin McCain quote from earlier. But to Dr. K's point, in the middle, this man who's getting arrested in Nashville, Tennessee, in the spring of 1960 is, Reverend James Lawson, who he's part of everything we said earlier. In terms of talking about, well, actually, there's not necessarily a lot of actually activity, public activity between the end of the Montgomery bus boycott and February 1960, but there are adults who are trying to organize and prepare for things, and so he's one of those people. He's when Dr. K mentioned how the Nashville, in fact, you talked about that. You talked about James Lawson. So anyway, he is one of the major figures. So one of the point I would say. So here's what I read in terms of talking about the founding of the SNCC conference. I read that King was there. King was famous and everything. But I heard, listen to me talk. What I read, though, was that Lawson was the one, not just for the Tennessee people, but that Lawson was the one who really made a big impact there. I mean, more so than the obviously very famous person, Martin Luther King Jr. And so as an influence, this guy, so really his influence on early SNCC is very profound. James Lawson. So anyway, James Lawson is a very important figure. So when we look at, let me go, and I'll stop. I'll let y'all get in here. Don't worry. When we go to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Statement of Purpose in 1960, I want to come back and actually look at some of this. I mean, James Lawson actually wrote this. You know what I mean? He wrote it, and yeah, the kids approved it and everything, but this is actually his writing. We'll come back to that in a second, because I'm gonna try to stop talking. Let me drink some water. That'll make me stop for a minute. So I guess this ain't no real proposition either, because the answer is, well, actually, no. I put this here as a proposition to make this point. I mean, Lawson is this major influence.
Yeah.
And I certainly believe those Nashville people who have been working with him, for years, they definitely had bought in.
I think this is a real proposition here to Kwame. I mean, I think in the ways that like some of the previous ones were demonstrably false and quickly dismissible. I think this one isn't, right. And I mean, I think, and again, and now I come in as and through the Black studies via religion and thinking through religion, and certainly James Lawson having been trained at Vanderbilt, right? I mean, James Lawson's shadow and impact is all over Vanderbilt, right?
That's
I mean,
Nashville. Is that in Nashville?
This is in Nashville, right? This is a guy who is a divinity student, right? As he's engaging in these sit-ins and these workshops and so on and so forth. I mean, and one way to kind of link it back to Louisville, he is a kind of Blaine Hudson of Vanderbilt, right? I mean, he is expelled from Vanderbilt for that work. The faculty around the divinity school rally around his cause, and many of them resign their post over this. And so and he's only later then kind of brought back. When I was a student there, he was brought back there on faculty to teach while I was there. And so I got a chance to meet Lawson a couple of times and to be in space with him. And he certainly continued to be to teach and be influential in the city and working with the Children's Defense Fund and some things that they had organized down there in Clinton, Tennessee at the Haley Farm. Anyway, Lawson looms large, right, in Nashville at Vanderbilt in particular, and in the graduate department of religion in the divinity school, because, and I'm saying all that to get back to, yes, Lawson really did believe in this, right? He really did. He really did believe in it as a philosophy, as a religious and spiritual philosophy, right, that grounded his work, much like King, much like, as we mentioned already, Vincent Harding and others who were deeply nonviolent to the core in terms of their overall philosophy. I just so happen to have, right, this book, Lawson's book here, the more recent Revolutionary Nonviolence, Organizing for Freedom, which is around his speeches and interviews and so on and so forth. I think this came out in 2022. But right, for all of that, the way that he deeply believed, and many of these organizers and teachers and leaders of the movement really believed in it as a philosophical and religious movement. Many more folks, had pragmatic reasons
Right.
for adopting nonviolence, not necessarily because they believed in it, not necessarily because they believed in it for religious or philosophical reasons, but they thought, maybe this is the only thing that will work. Maybe, we're simply outgunned, outmanned, and this would lead to greater violence against our communities, against our loved ones, and the like. And so we will adopt it for those reasons. But I think there were real tensions, right? So belief is always in tension with doubt, faith and doubt, right? I think there are folks who are practicing nonviolence even while they have real doubts about its legitimacy or even its efficacy, because we know that even nonviolent movements were met with heavy violent repression. And so I think if you trace even as we're talking about that period, 1960 to 1970, some folks who in 1960 would have started out with a deep faith in nonviolence, by the time you get to 66, 67, 68, that faith is shaken. I think they're beginning to question whether or not they are still adherents to nonviolence in that same way. And one of the documentaries I show in my religion class, there is one of those SNCC activists who is in one of those PBS documentaries who talks about, I used to be, right, a proponent of nonviolent, but after Bloody Sunday, after this, after that, I could no longer hold to those tenets. And so as Black Power, came into prominence, they certainly parted ways with a nonviolent philosophy. And so, yes, I think many of them really believed at one time, and that faith was shaken given the violent responses to even their very nonviolent actions.
Yeah, I mean, echoed Dr. McCormick, right? I mean, we can look at
That's the story of SNCC, actually.
right. That definitely is the story of SNCC. That's the story of that cover of making the making of Black revolutionaries is
Yes.
those folks are like nonviolence, right? Tactically, right? As a tactic, as a practice, as maybe not as a personal tenet, right? Stokely Carmichael is on record as saying, hey, right, that's what they believe, and I'm in the organization, and I'm operating as the organization operates, but that is not necessarily my philosophy, right? Which plays out in that famous, once we get to March Against Fear, that plays out in that famous exchange between he King, and they're walking and they're being interviewed and on the spot, not in any kind of backroom kind of conversations, which they had backroom conversations, but it plays out in the public sphere where they're asking King about nonviolence, and he's like, yes, I very much believe in the efficacy of it, I very much believe in it in a philosophical way, in a way in which I conduct and move in my life. And Stokely Carmichael's like, yeah, no, right, and right there on the scene in the spot. So definitely, there are people who, are seeing, question the efficacy of it along the way, right? But understand too, like once you get down in Mississippi and you're organizing with people in rural Mississippi in areas where they are protecting their lives, right? So they may have guns, right? And how can you go and organize with these people and then preach a certain sense of nonviolence when you don't live in rural Mississippi every day and have to contend with the things that impact your life, the violence that might impact your life? And so, to Dr. McCormick's point, there are always those tensions that did exist, that we did see will explode in probably a later SNCC Chronicle that we will probably have, right? Yeah.
Sure. But yeah, man, look at this stuff, man. It's okay. I know I ain't there. I know I'm a product of a whole different generation history, but like, I don't know, man. I'm even going back to like April of 6. I'm like, really? I mean, I just feel like there had to be a lot of kids who are going, okay, all right, we'll sign it. We'll sign it. But like, look at this, man. I mean, who thinks like that, man? Let me, because like you say, I mean, so one of the subsequent episodes of this SNCC Chronicles thing will be just like SNCC and nonviolence. We'll like get into that as a whole thing. Let me,
Sure, to Kwame. Oh, you're about to play something. I was just gonna,
I
yeah.
am. I
Yeah, I
am.
was gonna
You don't
respond.
actually, no, that was a rhetorical question. No response wanted.
We gonna keep on about nonviolent protests. But we ain't guaranteeing you how long we're going to remain nonviolent unless
Can y'all hear this? Can you hear it?
the only thing that nonviolence offered was a tactic that kept you from being wiped out. And that beyond that tactic, if you had the capacity at any given time to defend yourself successfully with violence, there are a number of people who were prepared to use it at all times. That's from the earliest days of the 60s on.
People were always very aggressive and used it when it was necessary. I never felt nonviolent.
But I think that my point is only that in terms of the organizing, which I still insist was the heart of the movement, you didn't go to these planations, you didn't go to these towns and somehow enter into discussions about violence and not. It didn't come out.
That's the difference. That's what I said. The difference is that...
But the difference doesn't turn on the issue of violence or nonviolence.
No, it doesn't turn on the issue of nonviolence, but goddamn it, that would have been a discussion.
But when those people came to Hartman's house to shoot at him, I mean, he pushed his family out the back door and grabbed the rifle off the wall and started shooting. And his explanation was simply that I wasn't being, as he said, non-violent. He said I was protecting my wife and family. Being violent or non-violent, people, that's not the way, that's not how people... No, John.
Those are some clips, or that is a clip from the documentary on Ella Baker that Joanne Grant did, 1981, I think, Fundi, and I think we're just very close. No, okay, so we got to sacrifice this one because we're already like a minute overdue to get to Proposition 8 because we do have to get to those last slides, and so.
I just wanted to note, right, just right quick. I just, if you say who believed in that, right? I mean, I think again because
this is a rhetorical
this
question,
is philosophical and religious, right? I mean, you're talking about deeply religious Black folk in the South, right? Also, too, right? And because we're also talking about Easter weekend here, there's this whole idea of redemptive suffering, right? That is so baked into the cultural fabric of Black America, right? In and through this kind of Christian narrative, I think it had a particular kind of sway. But I'm also interested in the ways that you move from kind of Black religious thinkers from a James Lawson to someone like James Cone, who was much more deeply influenced by Black Power movement and comes to reject that idea of nonviolence as the only way to think through a religious response to Black suffering and the possibility of liberation in religious terms. So I just want to note that there.
Okay. Well, like I say, I mean, there are a number of episodes I got in mind that just need much more exploration than we're doing in these short pieces we're doing here. And so nonviolence is one of them. So I don't feel bad about leaving that one alone. We got to leave this one completely alone. It's part of the same question, really, but we got to go because we're overdue. All right. So we're like I said, we're doing this on this particular weekend because we're 65 years ago, SNCC was founded. And so, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know this basic story, that Ella Baker is the one who organizes this conference. She uses her contact. She's aware of this stuff that's going on. And she says to herself, well, these people don't need to just continue doing this as their own, separate cells. They need to get together and figure out common strategy, working together, et cetera, et cetera. And so she's in her last days of working for SCLC, Martin Luther King Jr.'s organization. And this is really one of her last acts as, I forget the exact title she had with SCLC, was to organize this conference. Was it Shaw University, Raleigh, North Carolina, April 15th through the 17th, 1960. That's 65 years ago. Ella Baker, like I say, at this point in time, I think people who are, explored the subject of the civil rights movement have at least some familiarity with her. So we got a few pictures of her up, and I found this on the internets. I found this this picture of this news article where we actually, they actually got, I don't know where this is published, to be honest with you. Who would cover this? Whoever, it had to be the Black press. It had to be, but I don't know what what's the word? What paper would have covered it? But there we go. An actual, I didn't even know that this existed really until, when I was working on this. An actual picture, from the event. Because I don't think there's really not much. There aren't many artifacts from that conference in April of 1970. All right, so let's go to the proposition, right? So obviously there wouldn't have been a conference in April of 1960 without Ella Baker. So that's not really what we're asking. But the proposition is, if it were not for her, would in fact this organization come into existence? I mean, obviously, if not that point, some subsequent point. Without Ella Baker, SNCC never happens. What say ye?
Hard to say.
It's complicated.
Right, it is complicated, right? Because you're asking us to get in the DeLorean and go
true.
back and figure things out. But
Well,
I mean,
question.
yeah, no, but I mean, seeing as she secured the funding, she secured the space. Um, you know, she kept King and other leaders who were wanting to fold these kids into their movement at bay. Um, she gave them the organizing ideology along with James Lawson. If we're talking about, um, people who are influential in terms of shaping the ways in which the students would move forward from that point. I would say even more so than James Lawson, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. We're talking group-centered leadership. We're talking, emphasis on grassroots organizing. We're talking about, right, like everything that goes forward from them going into these communities and organizing in the ways that they go into these communities and organize is because Ella Baker sets forth the template in terms of how they should, even to the point where if we get out of like early 1960s, when will there be a SNCC going forward, right? Because people are sort of fractured and debating in terms of how they're going to move forward. We're talking about like continuing sit-ins, right? What do we do? We can't just continue to sit in. How do we grow? What do we do? What's our direction? And then you had people who wanted to move in a certain direction and other people who wanted to move in another direction. And it is Ella Baker that says, like, we don't have to split the baby, right? Like we could do both, right? And this is a way in which we could do both. And then she, again, sort of in her way, steps back and allows them to develop that. So yes, without Ella Baker, SNCC does not happen, and without Ella Baker, SNCC does not happen and unfold in the way in which it does.
Oh, well, that's absolutely a fact.
For sure. But yes, without Ella Baker, SNCC does not happen in my estimation.
What becomes of that? What becomes of the student movement? Yes, you're in your DeLorean, but what happens? How does that? I'm gonna let you fantasize. How does it play out without that sort of centralizing figure? Do they ever come together at all? Maybe not. Do they get swallowed up?
Maybe they get swallowed up because you lean on what you know, you lean on what exists, and youth chapters do exist. And again, to Ronnie Hurst's point, to Clara Lupa in Oklahoma City, she's an NAACP youth chapter leader who's leading the sit-ins, right? So there are people who are already doing that work, right? And so I think maybe it does become folded into that. And then if it becomes folded into that, we definitely don't see the SNCC that we see, right? Because then, as we know, the NAACP, we know chapters were trying to go their own way, but in terms of the main organizing organ of the NAACP, we know that they had their particular set of principles in which they wanted local chapters to fall in line with. And there were times where that would win out. Robert Williams, that didn't win out, but there were times in which that would win out. And so again, we don't see SNCC even unfold the way it does if it were just NAACP youth chapters carrying out this work. All right.
You got a thought on any thoughts on this, B?
No, I'm following the conversation, and I think this is one where I would want to say yes, almost unequivocally, but we always have to complicate it. I'll just know the irony, right? I mean, I think there's a deep irony in arguing that without Ella Baker, SNCC never happens. As someone again who emphasized democratic leadership and group leadership and decentered leadership, and so would Ella Baker herself would have wanted to say such a thing, right? Would she have wanted to claim that without her, SNCC never happens? Maybe she would have. Maybe she
Oh,
would
she
have
wouldn't
wanted.
have.
Maybe she, later on down the line wouldn't have been wanted to be displaced from the historical narrative. But I think, right. I think we're right in saying I don't think she would have wanted that. But yeah, it may be true nonetheless. So I wanted to say yes and keep it moving.
Yeah, for real. So, I put some things on here. I think, Dr. K, I think you covered some of these points in terms of specific contributions. You kind of went through all that, so I don't need to do that again. Just some details, This was a historic moment. So, you had 126 delegates from 56 colleges in 12 states. And that was the launch of this SNCC thing, man. Let's see what I want to do here. I got a couple. How are we doing time-wise? Well, let's just do one of these Ella Baker quotes. I got a couple of different ones. And if time goes well, maybe I'll come back. All right, let's see what I want to do. Hold on, I can get this to happen, I think. I'll tell you what, I'll just move this out the way. That's what I do. And play. Let's hear from Ms. Baker herself.
The ministers from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and some others, they felt sort of left out. And they called a gathering at the home of the president of the university. And I attended it. I don't know that they had planned for me to attend it, but naturally somebody ought to be there, because I didn't know what was going down. And they were more concerned about how they could literally attach the young to them. They didn't want to lose them, because this was something new. This was vitality, I suppose. Some have been accustomed to feeling that these are children of my church, and we are the older ones. And I told them I would not be a party to that kind of bargaining. I had always assumed that my role was to facilitate, which did not involve leadership. I didn't have the need for being considered a leader. And I think that got over to them in the original meeting, because they knew that the meeting came into being because I did it. But they also saw that I made no effort to become a leading figure in the meeting. And so they began to have that kind of confidence. And so they felt they could trust me to maybe further the matter of their independence.
Our original...
Just a couple of clips from, once again, that clip was from Fundi, the film like we mentioned a bit earlier that Joanne Grant put together. She also wrote a good biography of Ella Baker called Freedom Bound. I think that did I have the picture up on the earlier page? I think I did. Yeah, there's another book by Barbara Ramsby, is more recent, but I also would certainly highly recommend Miss Grant's book as well, Ella Baker. So she's one of those central figures. So anyway, she actually kind of responded to a little bit of what we were talking about here as well. I wanted to also get in a quote, something from a 1970 interview that she did. And so, here she is kind of reflecting on, her life in the movement in those years. And she says, I have always felt it was a handicap for oppressed peoples to depend so largely upon a leader, because unfortunately in our culture, the charismatic leader usually becomes a leader because he has found a spot in the public limelight. It usually means he has been touted through the public media, which means that the media made him, and the media may also undo him. There is also the danger in our culture that because a person is called upon to give public statements and is acclaimed by the establishment, such a person gets to the point of believing that he is the movement. Such people get so involved with playing the game of being important that they exhaust themselves in their time and they don't do the work of actually organizing the people. I have no idea who she's talking about. I have no idea who she's talking about. But anyway, Ella Baker, who worked for SCLC, as we have mentioned, and some of y'all know this stuff anyway. So anyway, her, what's the word? I mean, her contribution cannot be overstated in terms of talking about SNCC, and this is certainly not the last time we'll talk about her. But let's move on, and I guess this is kind of related to what we were saying earlier, but this also, I think, will allow us to, at least mention, some of the subsequent history that SNCC gets into. So this is, like I say, this is a proposition then. If the youth had not, we might have already answered this actually, but if the youth had not gone independent, the movement would have been set back years with an exclamation point.
I think Dr. Kinchin has already addressed this and answered it in the an affirmative. It's not that the possibility that SNCC might not have emerged, might not have happened, or that the movement wouldn't have taken this direction. But I think the key words here are certainly set back years. It wouldn't have happened the way it did, and it certainly, I think, would have been, hampered and hindered in terms of, how it came together. If they had been co-opted, their energies had been co-opted by SCLC and NAACP and others who did not want to see that more independent or radical edge of the young people at that time.
Seriously, I mean, so like I say, direct action, this is the thing that they really had started. Not to say that, like I say, some of those NAACP youth councils would not necessarily have gotten on board as well. But like up in the corner there, the jails feel the whole jail no bail thing. That was something that emerges out of the young people, and that was one of the tactics that is what's the word, an advance in that in that nonviolent movement down there. What is this? This is a picture of them going down into Mississippi. This is Bob Moses at this age. So the whole idea of we're going to go into the rural South and try to organize people for the purpose of voting, voter registration. Will any of those other organizations have been doing that? This is another picture. This is Charles Sherrod. He's also probably down in Mississippi. You got that. You got this picture of the Freedom Rides. That was certainly a young people's thing, even though it originally started with CORE and what's his name? I can't think of his name right now. Farmer. You got the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, right? This is the origin of the symbol of the Black Panther. That's a SNCC project. Would that have come about if they had joined, one of those national organizations? And then, of course, we've already alluded to this development in SNCC's history in terms of, Black power becoming the ethos around which they wish to organize in their later years. And so all this is stuff that came out of this being, this picture in the middle is the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which is more, I wasn't just a SNCC project, actually. It was but anyway, these are just pictures to amplify the point in the affirmative, right? That these are important chapters in the history of our movement. When I say our movement, I mean Black people's movement toward, freedom, toward self-determination. These are important chapters, and would they? It's certainly, well, I think like you said, Brandon, I think we've actually probably already answered the question, but I still felt the need to keep talking. Shall we move on? Anybody want to say anything else?
No, I think you right. Shock troops of the movement, right? Is what they're called, and every thread of the movement. Like you could go for it, right? If you talk about even the Black Panther Party in Oakland, who are early on initially inspired by SNCC. If you don't get SNCC in the way it is, do you get Black Panther, right? Like there are reverberative effects when we talk about SNCC. So yes, I agree wholeheartedly with the sentiment.
Well, we just might get to our agenda. So, we're up to proposition number 2. although we might not get to 11 once I do this one. But given the singularity of legal racial segregation, there is little to no applicability of the sit-in movement to the Black predicament in the USA today. And so you have some illustrations to like, these are some illustrations, not all, of like the Black predicament today. So, you got the discrimination in housing values. That only applies to people who own houses. You got the median income is still quite dramatic, right? You know what I mean? So Black people still earn the 60 cent for every dollar a white person or white household earns. Well, this is very conservative. Average Black household Black wealth average white household wealth 7 times that of the average Black household. I've seen numbers that are closer to like 14 in terms of what is the ratio of white household wealth to Black wealth. What do we got over here? I'm sure everybody who's listening here, the whole prison to pipeline, the whole dramatic overrepresentation of Black people in the system, in the prison system. And of course, we got something here, which is, certainly, what's the word? The vast overrepresentation of unarmed people getting killed by police. So in police killing of Black lives. Now, these are just some aspects of, and I don't think this is necessarily all of it, but these are some of the major aspects, I think, of considering the Black predicament today, how inequality is still like absolutely baked into the structures of the society. So anyway, what do y'all think of this proposition? Is there any applicability of the sit-in movement to our situation today?
I'm gonna let Dr. Kitchen go right first on this one, but my immediate thought would be that this is certainly more provocation than proposition, and if it were in fact false, we probably wouldn't be having this 2-hour long discussion about the sit-in movement and SNCC today, right? I mean, we would have to assume, right, that studying this history and the work that those young people did in their era matters and is meaningful for us today into thinking about our own contemporary struggles and predicaments, even if it's not a one-to-one correlation. But I'm gonna stop there and I'll come back to it because Dr. Kinchin gonna give us the historical specificity here with which to push back on this provocation, not proposition, that you have put before us.
It's a proposition, and the other thing that may not have been clear in terms of how it was articulated, we're particularly talking about like the sit-in type tactic. But anyway, what y'all got? You got, Dr. K? Since he did his preface and then didn't actually want to answer.
And then threw it back to me, right? And
exactly.
I almost feel like as a historian, I should be offended at the question, right? Because as a historian, you're asking me to not, particularly as a movement historian, civil rights movement historian, to not consider the ways in which history is impactful, can be impactful, and is impactful in ways that we may not even see. And so as a one-to-one, as McCormick said, maybe not, right? Does, sitting in, and we're talking about sitting in, we didn't talk largely about what sit-ins also spawned, which were wait-ins, which were pray-ins, which were read-ins, which were
die-ins.
Right, die-in, right? And so now we do see today die-ins, right? Would we question the applicability of a march today, right? We might question whether or not a march has the same meaning and or effectiveness, but would we question the applicability of that, right? I don't know if necessarily we would, right? So as a one-on-one, huh?
I don't know who this we is.
Okay, all right. With people,
a classic Black quote. Who's we?
Who's we? With one. With people. Would people question that, right? It's not necessarily a one-to-one, but like the spirit of what the sit-ins did in terms of you know, sparking larger movements to happen because of the singularity of that particular moment, right? We can look to history to say, right, people used at their disposal what they had at their disposal in order to spark change as people who are often on the margins of society or put on the margins of society or placed on the margins of society by all of these systemic factors that you've talked about. Like, what can we use at our disposal in order to spark change, right? If we don't get the sit-ins, do we get the 64 Act, right? Which
Oh, that's a different
civil rights.
question, man.
Yeah, no,
No.
but my point is sit-ins help to bring about the 64 Act, which helps to spark some level of systemic change, right? And
Yes.
so my point is we could look at, and I don't want to filibuster here, but we could look at the sit-ins as a way to say, again, what do we have here that we could use within the ways in which society operates today? Maybe not the sit-in itself, but what do we have, right? What can we use, and how can we use that to attack the things that are then attacking us? And so I think if we're just looking at the momentum of history and we're using the momentum of history to say, how can we then take that and apply that, then yes.
Look, I think what you did to begin there, Dr. K, which was to move from the sit-ins to the wait-ins to the read-ins, to which we all participate in, by the way, African American read-ins, in a moment of banned books and banned scholarship and erasure of history and the like, to die-ins. Of course, we know that those die-ins were very important in leading up to after Trayvon Martin, after Mike Brown, after Eric Garner, all those kinds of police killings, which is one of the images there on the screen, what you're referencing in terms of the Black predicament today. And so I think those tactics are still with us today. They're still applicable. Are they a silver bullet to cause the structural change we need? I think that's a different kind of question, but it's certainly still applicable. I would even push that even further to the kind of sit-in, or another way to think about it is, what does it mean to occupy space, right? And to occupy space is a kind of disruption of business as usual, even to your Free Palestine hat that you were wearing today in this frame. And so many students who occupied administrative buildings to encampments and the like. I think, you could certainly make a case that is an outworking of the trajectory set forth by the sit-in movement. But then even just philosophically speaking, the decentered nature of the work, that, again, when Ella Baker becomes involved in it, and I think what you saw with the Black Lives Matter movement, for better or for worse, was a attempt to model after that kind of leaderless leadership. It was certainly, Ella Baker was largely evoked by those folks, especially by young people who were trying to push away from the hegemony of Black church leadership in terms of the struggle, making space for women in terms of leadership, right? And so I think there are all kinds of ways where we saw the outworking of the sit-ins and SNCC in more contemporary movements for justice and social change, and the conditions that Black folks are facing.
I hear you. I kind of feel like you're answering a slightly different question. Yeah, so I guess this question really was designed around, do like sit-in type tactics, is there some path? Let me say it again. Can sit-in tactics address any of the issues that like I put up there? Because my answer would be no. My answer would be like a solid no. So I'm not really being provocative. I'm saying there ain't nothing sit-in type activity can do to address, the railroading of Black kids into prison, or the median income, or the relative wealth, or racial discrimination in terms of like real estate or police killing. So yeah, there was a lot of.
But I think those are
Maybe
deeper
this makes me sound
questions,
being provocative. Let
Sequoia.
me just finish this last one, and I'll let you respond there as well. So yeah, there was a lot of activity around police killings, in the George Floyd, et cetera. But like, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm inclined to say that didn't accomplish nothing at all. No disrespect to the people. I mean, but I don't think anything was accomplished. A and B, I don't think there was anything that could be accomplished in terms of addressing the fundamental problems that have all these brothers, primarily brothers, getting killed by cops. I don't think there's a damn thing that like a protest activity has to do because, like you alluded to, this stuff is absolutely structural. So
But
proposition
that's what I'm
one,
saying. I think this is a larger question about the permanence, right, of structural racism, white supremacy in this country, and is there anything that could be done by way of liberation work, organizing work, justice work that could disrupt the deep roots of white supremacy? I mean, and this is certainly a question that our Afro pessimist brothers and sisters are asking in a different philosophical register, right? Without the destruction of the world as we know it is the language that they would use, which is a different way so the ultimate efficacy of those tactics versus whether they are applicable, I think maybe even a slightly different question, right?
okay.
Are they applicable? Sure. Are they finally efficacious? Probably not. But then what is, right? What is short of dismantling, you know what I
Well,
mean? Racial capitalism, right? Dismantling U.S. world hegemony, right? I mean, like all of those kinds of things. Are so deeply entrenched problems that we become pessimistic. I think just thinking about trying to undo those things with any particular tactic. And yet, I think to Kenshin's point, I think we use the tools that are available to us to disrupt what we can, where we can, and open up enough space of freedom to exist in for a while, knowing all the while that there's going to be backlash, reentrenchment, and violent white responses to whatever tactic it is that we deploy, but trying to open up as much freedom as we can for our people, when and where we can.
I think you took this question as a diminishment of the sit-in movement, and that's not what it was about. It was just saying, can those tactics address some of the fundamental problems today? I mean, obviously, this whole thing wouldn't be existing if it were not for, our venerating these people's contributions in history. Um, But another large question. So really, my last point really is really more like on a perhaps educational tip, but it's slightly culturally as well. So when we talk about the sit-in movement, right? Talking what was the impact in quote unquote culture or popular culture or something like that. And you got to go to jazz to see something. Something that I think everybody needs to be familiar with, but then certainly, our Black studies community, um, some of the contributions made culturally by some of our major figures. And so we have the Freedom Now suite by Max Roach, which was recorded in 1960, in the midst of this stuff, a few months after it. We insist Max Roach's Freedom Now suite. I recommend if anybody's hearing this is unfamiliar, you should check it out. You can hear it on YouTube. In fact, I don't have time to do it, but there's a live recorded performance of it on YouTube as well. Uh, so Max Roach, Oscar Brown, that's another name that another major figure. But like Abby Lincoln, that's certainly a name that I think a lot of us need to be more familiar with. A singer, actress. She's the singer there as well. And so here's something. So the cover, you're looking at the cover there as well, which is you may recognize. This is like this isn't an actual what's the word, photo of a sit-in. It's what's the word? It's staged, but to represent that. So in other words, here, like I said, here's this notable jazz artist directly responding to what the young people are doing, and then I think kind of I want to say singular way. That may not be true, but certainly this is kind of one of the defining, what's the word, cultural artifacts of the era. Just for the record, like, so really, if we really want to, I'm not going to say a whole lot about this, but if we want to look at how the movement impacts black music, we really are going to be in jazz in the 50s and 1960s. Most of this, what we're going to see, is in the jazz world until you get like to the later part. Like everybody knows James Brown from 1968, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," and that's a different sort of moment. So this is a little bit earlier moment there as well. So anyway, I'm saying, hey, some of y'all might already know about this, but here's a cultural moment that's actually of significant interest to us. I also want to point out then, so I'm gonna play a little bit of a clip for you. So I guess this is kind of going from the Freedom Now suite specifically to Abby Lincoln as a cultural figure. So there's a film that came out, I think, either at the end of last year or the beginning of this year. I want to call your attention to. It also, I think, is worth your time. Soundtrack. Wait a minute, what's it called? Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. Uh, some European filmmaker made it, but really, it's really it's about several things. It's about the United States attempt to use jazz musicians to serve a Cold War agenda at the same time that they're pursuing the Cold War agenda of destabilizing progressive governments, specifically the Congolese government led by Patrice Lumumba. And then the third stream is, how jazz musicians are responding to this and in a resistance sort of manner. And so there's a little bit of clip, there's a short clip from the film toward the end I want to play for you all now, which was it covered. So what's the word? It interplays some Max Roach playing, from the Freedom Now suite with an account of one of the things that Abby Lincoln is known for. That might be an overstatement, but one of the things, one of the moments in Abby Lincoln's career that's relevant to us certainly is her involvement in this protest at the United Nations. What's the word? Accusing the United States of involvement in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. So this is an interesting little clip. I think it's under 2 minutes for sure that I want to play for you. And so, yeah. So anyway, it's relevant to our time period. This is 61, actually.
Learned this morning by the Katanga authorities of the reported death of Patrice Lumumba and two of his colleagues. Then is simply this: shall the United Nations survive? Shall the attempt to bring about peace by the concerted power of international understanding be discarded? Today we're here to mourn the cruel murder of Lumumba.
Anyway, I wanted to get that in. That's certainly a part of the times, and what can I say? Where certainly in 1960, as far as I can tell, SNCC and the kids involved in SNCC are really concerned, I think, almost entirely with domestic affairs, right? With the American racial predicament. One of the things that SNCC, one of its contributions going forward then is um, their internationalism. They're really out ahead of certainly a lot of the Black movement in terms of an international perspective, in terms of visiting Africa, and particularly in terms of what's the word, protest against the Vietnam War. So anyway, that's certainly a part. Anyway, let me stop just because there's so much to say. I was making this point about jazz, and I just put this in here because we're at 3 o'clock, and so this is just a very quick thing. So I remember I was saying how really it's in jazz. If you really want to see some how Black musicians are responding to the movement in these years, the early part of the 60s, really look in jazz. So Art Blakey, some people may know the great drummer Art Blakey. Here's an album called The Freedom Rider. As you can see, recorded in the whole month that the Freedom Ride thing was going on, although it wasn't released for a few years. The last thing I'll mention, just a brief piece. So some of you may recognize the name of Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas, who shut down the schools in Arkansas. This is part of the Little Rock Nine story. And so Charles Mingus, this is kind of one of the Fables of Faubus, a jazz classic. It has vocals. You should look it up. Particularly the original Fables of Faubus is, ridiculing this guy. And anyway, Charles Mingus would certainly be another Black artist who in this time period, we can see their art kind of directly reflect this movement that the kids started. So that was just me kind of being educational because I know there's a tremendous familiarity with some of these major figures in jazz music. So that's a little piece there. We are pretty much out of time. This last screen I put up here, these are some of the topics I think we might get to in future episodes of the SNCC Chronicles. So like I say, it's a vast story. There's so much that is a part of this thing, this story here as well. So let me see here. What am I looking to do? I'm looking to do one other thing here. That's it. So that's about it, folks. We made it to it's just a little bit past 3 o'clock. So I kind of accomplished my agenda. Although obviously we had to do a lot of cutting off, but that's the way it always goes. So good people, good doctors, good colleagues. Y'all got any kind of, last words you want to share with our little audience as we have started this effort to try to try to represent for an important chapter, I think, in Black people's history.
No, I think you said it right. Like SNCC is the story of Black people. SNCC's, more intently is the story of the movement, right? And almost always, right? If we're tracing the evolution from direct action protest to Black Power, like you can't tell that story without telling SNCC's story. And so, I just appreciate the conversation because I don't think SNCC gets enough discussion, right? As an organization that is the through line of that of those particular movements and these mileposts that make up the movement as a whole. So I'm looking forward to where the conversations can go, and so I've enjoyed being in dialogue and community with everybody here, and with specifically with my colleagues because we don't get to do that enough. So I appreciate that, and looking forward to what's on the table next.
All right, cool runnings.
Yeah. Again, I appreciate it. Thanks. Look, Kwame, I really do appreciate, this entire series that you put together. Is good for us to get a chance to dialogue at this level, and virtually. It's good for the department. I appreciate it, and I appreciate this series. I'm glad to be part of this conversation today. SNCC certainly deserves to be unpacked over a series. You can't get in it in even 2 hours that we've had today.
You're just talking about, you're trying to do the first few months, and we didn't even do that good.
Yeah,
Well,
their
we didn't
story.
do it as thoroughly as we would
You
like to.
you
That's
you can't, yeah, you can't get through that history that needs to be unpacked. And I think to the point, I think at least if we were misreading your last proposition, the fact remains that SNCC's history is still unfolding, right? It is still uh, reverberating in the present, from the way that students organize and think about their work, and activists think about their liberation work. The work that was begun with SNCC and Ella Baker and others is still with us and shaping questions that we're asking and interventions that we're trying to make, and liberation struggles that we're trying to engage in, to affect Black freedom. And so it is good and necessary that we're taking up SNCC and spending this time with them. And I thank you all for allowing me to be part of the conversation. I do appreciate it.
well, cool. Well, cool. Hey, y'all like my T-shirt?
I
Can you
do.
see
I
it?
can't even, I just see
I
Am
June
I not
Jordan. I don't
talking
see
like the
what it says
lady?
at the bottom.
We are
It's
the
one
ones
of her
we've been
famous
with.
quotes. We are the ones.
Okay, I see.
And
Yes.
so, I mean, that's a cool quote. And of course, June Jordan is, one of the greats. But like in reference to what we're trying to do here, I would say the quote is relevant. You know what I mean? So we're trying to do some stuff. We're the ones we've been waiting for. We got to do it. We got to advance the conversation. And so I'm happy that you have a state of technology that allows us to, do this. You know what I mean? Like you can't really have, in other words, pulling people together physically, is a whole different order of things. But like if we can facilitate these sort of conversations and kind of get them out there, man, I think we, can serve the department's mission a little bit more. That's I think that's what
I
I
think
think
so,
that's
and
what.
I think this does good work. It makes a particular kind of intervention, even if it doesn't do all the work. It does some good work here, and I think back again, thinking back to the applicability question, right? Does it change anything? Well, what does? I mean, you're wearing a June Jordan shirt. June Jordan did poetry for the people, right? And some
You
could
did.
argue, what is the efficacy of poetry, right, in a moment like this? Right, but poetry is a liberatory act, right? It is a revolutionary act, and our poets have been our revolutionaries. So to the degree that you're wearing a June Jordan shirt saying that we are the ones that we've been waiting for, I think all of our efforts in our particular lanes of struggle, I think, are important to the larger mission of Black studies and the Black freedom struggle. So I appreciate June Jordan for sure.
Right on, right on. Well, I mean, that's about it. And I know y'all are busy people, so y'all got stuff to do. Well,
Indeed,
I
we gotta
mean,
get to these kids.
yeah, I know you do.
I gotta
I
get to
think,
these kids. Let me say,
yes, you do. Yes, you
yeah.
do. Yeah, I'll stop.
Check
Uh,
check check the chat. I think somebody asked you about a specific title, so just check the chat.
okay, I'll do
Um,
that. I'll do
yeah,
that because
for
I have
yeah.
not done that. I have not done that. I need to do that more in the as this stuff goes on. Well, all right, man. I mean, yeah. All right. I yeah. I ain't got any. I have a whole lot else to say, but on the other hand, it's good. It's good. I appreciate it. I thank you both. And I thank anyone who was listening or everybody who was listening. Let me put it like that. And I'm going to go ahead. Well, no, I'm going to look at this chat and see what's up. But I guess I'll officially say goodbye.
All right.
And let me see what's happening in this
I'm
chat
signing
here.
off.
Oh, shoot. There's
All
all
right.
this.
See
And
y'all.
I
Whoa.
look forward to.
There's like millions of comments here.
All right. All right. Peace,
Yeah,
All
everybody.
yeah.
right.
Peace, Brandon. We'll get up a little bit
Peace.
later.
All
Let me
right.
see
All
what
right.
else is going here. This is Dorsey talking. Okay, I'm going to have to read that one. That's too long. If anybody, I don't know who's still here. Greetings from GVSU. I guess all these people are gone now. Jakia, you here? Yeah, you were real active in here, Jakia. I ain't seen none of this. You and Dorsey both. Now, is there a specific question? Let's see. Ah, exactly. I see you. I see you. What title to search for in YouTube? So look at the flyer and the announcement. I don't know if he's still here, but if you are still here, Dorsey, the flyer and announcement both have the URL for the YouTube page. And you can just search PAS and Friends Conversations in Black as well. Okay. I think that's about it. I think we're gonna, I think I've done it. I think I'm gonna hit buy now. All right, let's see.